But Night of the Living Dead is where it all started. It's the original classic. I don't recommend picking this one up on a cheapo edition like you can get in these 50 horror movie packs or something like that. I've done that before. The copies in those cheapo packs like that, yes, you can acquire the movie very cheaply. It's not a hard to find movie by any means. There's multitudes of different versions, like I said, out there. But the quality is what suffers. And like I said, until I got the Millennium Edition here in the red case, I haven't seen it look better, guys. I really did. I was impressed by it. And you got to understand the film stock and everything they used for this movie back in the day. It was not the best that they could probably buy. So the best I've ever seen this movie look is definitely the Elite Entertainment version of it. It sports a THX transfer, like I was saying before. Commentary with George Romero and the entire cast. Got the Night of the Living Bread parody on it. Mono soundtrack. 5-to-1 remix soundtrack. Still photo gallery. The history of Romero's company, which is just a photo montage, really. It's got a audio interview, the last audio interview with Dwayne Jones, the star of the movie, which I got to say was interesting to listen to because it wasn't the expected interview that I expected to hear from Dwayne Jones. Dwayne Jones is a very classy guy, very intelligent man, or was a very intelligent man, may he rest in peace. But basically, you felt his sorrow, through the interview. You really felt like he missed out on the royalties. Plus, he was hounded for decades thereafter. Everybody thought of him as Ben, his character, not himself. But listen to the audio interview with him whenever you get a chance. It's very insightful, I thought. Night of the Living Dead's Judy Ridley is on there as well. Who played a supporting role in the movie. They do a interview. It looked like an interview from maybe the 80s, I believe, when it was put out. There's some other, multitudes. There's the entire original shooting script on here. So like I said, it's got some special features, but it sounds like a lot, but there are really just a few in there that's watchable or worth listening to. So take it with a grain of salt there, and just and understand too that this is 1:33 to 1 full frame. I believe that's the way it was shot, and I believe that's about the only way you can view this movie. Don't quote me on this, but I don't think there's a sanctified George Romero widescreen edition out there. I think it's always been in full screen and probably always will be, due to the age and when it was shot and the type of film stock it was shot on. But, like I said, not a full-fledged review because, guys, you know these movies. If you're horror movie buffs or just genuinely movie buffs, or general movie buff, I should say, you're going to know who or what Night of the Living Dead is. I don't have to tell you about the story of the movie or anything of that nature. Just want to tell you my feelings about it. The first time I watched Night of the Living Dead was probably back in the mid to late 80s because it was my mother and father that told me about this movie because it was from their generation, when it was spawned, if you will. And they I watched the first zombie movie. I can't remember if George Romero's zombie movie that I saw was either Dawn or Day. I can't remember which. But Night of the Living Dead came later. It was a step down because it's black and white. To me as a kid, I say now I appreciate the black and white of it because it gives you a taste from the 60s, just like Dawn gave you a taste of the 70s, Day the 80s, and on into the 90s, and with Night of the Living Dead remake, and then eventually Land of the Dead, and others we're going to talk about today. But like I said, that's about all I'm going to say on Night of the Living Dead. I think it's been reviewed to death, so I'm not going to review it, but if you are in the market to buy it, I highly recommend the Elite Entertainment Edition. Let me get a little drink of water there, guys. We've covered Night of the Living Dead. We've got to move into Dawn of the Dead. Moving right along, guys. I've included these next two selections in the Blu-ray vlogs that I was doing there for a while. The first one I'm going to talk to you about, and I'm going to try to do these in chronological order. If I don't mess it up, I'll try to not mess it up. But the next one is the Zombie Epic. And I like to call this one an epic because it has an epic feel to it. It is, of course, his zombie masterpiece, Dawn of the Dead from 1978. Dawn of the Dead was interesting. I'm going to guess that I did not see that this was not my first George Romero zombie movie, although I think it was a close second. I believe I viewed Day of the Dead on home video VHS first, As soon as I got done viewing that one, I went back to the video store the next week and got Dawn of the Dead on good old VHS there. Which, brings me more to the point. A lot of these I viewed the first time on VHS. It was not DVD, of course, or even to think of Blu-ray or Laserdisc or any of the other formats that were out. But the big VHS boom of the 80s is whenever I got hooked into horror movies growing up, and Dawn of the Dead was one of those that just stood out, and it got rented over and over and over again. Every time we'd go to the video store, we'd find a video store that had like cheap dollar movies, or usually the older movies you could rent them for like 99 cents or something like that. And Dawn of the Dead was definitely one of those. It's sort of like Escape from New York with John Carpenter there and Kurt Russell. I would just rent it incessantly over and over and over again. I'd pull it off the shelf and I'd give it to my mom, and she'd be like, "Oh gosh, not that one again. No, no." I'd be like, "Yes, yes, it's great, it's great." But Dawn of the Dead, as I was saying before, not going to do a review on it or anything, because guys, if you're a horror buff, you've seen these before. Dawn of the Dead really has that. It's not a full-on horror movie. It is a horror movie, but it's also so much more. That's what I've got to say about it. It's different from Night of the Living Dead, which was his first movie. Night of the Living Dead was more of a creepy, introductory horror movie, just all-out horror movie. Dawn of the Dead is a horror movie and has the same George Romero independent film feel to it, but it's got that epic feel to it. They made this movie on basically a shoestring, pieced together budget, the same family creative atmosphere that he made with Night of the Living Dead. You got to remember, this is 10 years later. He's honed his skills after doing movies like The Crazies and other films that he's experimented through the early to mid 70s. He was just prepared enough to create, and that's why this went on to make a good few bucks for the production there. And I got to say, it's very much due, because like I say, year after year you hear new generations watching this movie, and it's because it's a good movie. It's got that family atmosphere that created it, and you can tell they put their blood, sweat, and tears into this production because it feels realistic. They used realistic locations. They didn't use blue screen. They didn't use green screen. They didn't use CGI because they didn't have it. They had to make do with what they had. They Foleyed their own sounds for the gunshots. They done all this. They got Tom Savini on board for the special effects, and boy were they great. These were like groundbreaking special effects for that era. What I like most about Dawn of the Dead, as I said before, it's not only a horror movie, but it's so much more. It has an epic feel to it. You really believed, like whenever I was a kid, I remember watching this as a young man and thinking, you really believed that this was going on around the world, even though you only see about 5 different locations in the movie. I mean, just off the top of my head, you see the news station where Fran and the Flyboy are introduced in the movie. You see, after that, you see the dock where they meet up with Roger and Peter. Then they fly off. You see the countryside where the good old boys are shooting zombies and hunting them like cattle and stuff. Then you see basically the mall, and then after that, you have the motorcycle gang and all that. So you do the list. You only have a handful of locations in this movie, but what George Romero did so great, as I said before, he's an excellent editor. I think the trick was through just specific, groundbreaking editing and making the best of what he had, and being ultimately taking his time and being very creative. He created a great adventure thriller horror movie, all in one movie, all in one 2 to 2.5 hour trip, depending on what version you watch of this movie. And basically just made it worthwhile for a lot of different people. So if you weren't there in the theater to watch it just for horror, you had action. I mean, you got SWAT guys running around with M16s and people getting shot left and right. You've got automatic weapons, a biker gang sporting guns and all this other stuff. You got all types of fight scenes in the movie. You've got the adventure element. They don't just stay in one place until they get to the mall. They stay there the longest, but it's always moving. It's never sitting still for any length of time long enough for you to get bored with it. It just struck a chord because you actually wanted to care about these characters too. The first movie, Night of the Living Dead, it's like you didn't have enough time to really get to know the characters. there was still a small group atmosphere, but Ben just shows up and the action's already in the play. With this one, they had a little more character development for the main characters, and you just got to know them. So that by the time you got to the biker gang scenes where their home is being invaded, this home that they've taken for themselves, you feel bad for them. You feel like, God, everything that they created and they lost Roger for, the bikers are just going to come in and screw it all up in one fell swoop. So, you know, like I said, I guess my point is you just cared more about this movie. The script was great. The locations were great. It felt realistic. It was a homegrown effort from George Romero in his best creative years.